Welcome back to The Big Picture. My guest is Rod Watson from the Buffalo News, and we're having a discussion about politics and policies and all kinds of different things. And, you know, one of the things that we were talking about is the president's policies with the border. I want to talk about a little bit about his economic policies. And by most standards, the feeling is that the economy is doing better. Unemployment is fairly low, especially with minorities and women. And the tax cut for corporations and for individuals seems to have stimulated the economy to the point where people are feeling better about themselves. The recent polls have shown that the majority of people think that the country is going in a good direction. And that wasn't the case under Obama in the past. We didn't seem to have that energy. How do you weigh in on that? What do you think is happening?
The tax cuts, I think, were not my cup of tea. I think they were disproportionately, every analysis I've read says they were disproportionately skewed to the wealthiest Americans. Granted, people in the middle class, the lower classes, they got something. But you're talking about giving crumbs to some people and giving filet mignon and lobster to somebody else. That's not my idea of fairness, even if people, I think it'll probably prove successful because everybody got a little bit. People at the lower end got a little bit. And a lot of times that's enough to buy people off. That's enough to convince people, to persuade people that this is in your interest. It's always amazed me how low-income people can support somebody who proposes what I think the late President Bush called voodoo economics. And yet, you know, they can convince lower class and working class people that it's in their best interest because they get a couple of dollars while everybody else gets $1,000.
Well, actually, and I began my commentary with the fact that I was a fan of John F. Kennedy. Yeah. And at the time, I really didn't know much about policies. But now, when I look back at Kennedy, I actually understand, and I've found in studying him and his policies, that he was a proponent way before Ronald Reagan and way before Donald Trump. He was a proponent of lowering taxes in order to stimulate business and have that provide more jobs, which would stimulate the economy. I mean, in other words, John F. Kennedy was the first trickle-down president, and he was a Democrat, and it worked for him when he cut taxes in his administration. So I don't think it's a Democrat or Republican thing. It's an economic thing that, in my experience, with what I've read, has been successful every time it's been tried.
But it's a question of proportion. How much do you skew toward the upper classes, and how much do you skew toward the middle class and the working class? And I think this one is way out of balance.
Well, it may seem counterintuitive because obviously when you say you're giving to the rich, that has a bad sound to it. But what do the rich do? Well, they invest more in their companies, which provides more jobs, which basically gives more money to the people that need the jobs and need the income.
If that's how it worked. But from the analyses I've read, a lot of that money is going into stock dividends and buying back stock and that sort of thing. I guess the stock market goes up, but not that much of it actually trickles down to the workers and to hiring more people.
Bite. Let's listen to the sound bite. It's a gentleman named Robert Johnson, who was the co-founder of the BET, Black Entertainment Network. And he was doing an interview, I think it was with CNN. Can we pull that up?
I believe that if you take into account the Trump tax cut, you take into account the drop in unemployment, and particularly unemployment for African Americans, it's the lowest it's ever been in history. And you take into account the fact that interest rates are fairly stable. No, they will probably drift up, but so far. And I think the business community is committed to reinvest capital that they get from some of the tax advantages, and that as a result of that, I think the economy is going to grow. When you put all of that together, and particularly from my vantage point of the focus on urban markets and African American community, when you got about African Americans are down around 4 or 5, something like that, that's a pretty pretty good testament to the fact that there are a lot of jobs out there looking for people who are traditionally underemployed. And that only comes when the economy is growing.
So I think it's kind of a situation where everybody gets helped, and that can't be a bad thing. I mean, it may be, like you say, a proportional thing where you think people aren't being helped enough, but I think compared to the past and other efforts, it's a positive because people are they're in a better place than they were before, aren't they?
It doesn't surprise me a bit that Robert Johnson would be in favor of this. Robert Johnson is a millionaire, if not a billionaire.
He's a billionaire,
So,
yes.
yeah, so it doesn't surprise me a bit. But I mean, you talk about unemployment going down. How many of those people have to work 2 jobs or 3 jobs just to make ends meet?
Well, that's a good question.
That's a part of it too.
It's a good question. If the jobs are there for them, I would hope that they get, I know wages are going up along with the jobs. I mean, because...
Slightly, I mean, wages just slightly faster than inflation, so you're not really
faster
not gaining that much yet.
And that's in comparison with before when wages, most jobs that were created in the last 8 years were jobs that were like fast food and minimum wage jobs that really didn't keep up with inflation. So in that respect, the jobs that are being created and the wages that are being paid are an improvement. And so, I mean, we can go back and forth on statistics, but
again, because it comes, I mean, when you consider wages in contrast to inflation, it's an improvement, but how much of an improvement? It goes back to what I'm talking about the crumbs for the people at the bottom.
Well, it's a start in any respect. It's a start. So hopefully we're going in the right direction.
Well, the people at the top got a pretty good head start. So.
Okay, let's talk about the media. You in one of your columns, you said that, you know, barring the CNN reporter, Jim Acosta, it was not a good thing. It was kind of dictatorial, or I'm not sure how you put it in your column.
That's probably pretty close.
Yeah, you thought it was a bad thing. Now, I sat in on, when I was working in Los Angeles, I did a number of presidential press conferences. And when I would hesitate asking questions, I would be very timid about it because there was such limited time and so many reporters wanting to ask questions that the general feeling was you didn't want to hog the time. You wanted to ask your question, get your answer, and let the next guy go. When I would see Jim Acosta, you know, pontificating, not just asking a question, but starting a debate, I think that, you know, back in the day when I was doing that, he would have gotten for lack of a better way to put it, he would have gotten a Canon suppository from one of the cameramen to get out of the way and stop talking. It's a different atmosphere, and I just can't imagine that anybody in the press room would complain not having him around to take up the time.
Well, he does have that reputation, I understand that, but again, you have to look at this in the context of what this president has said about the media, which reflects his feelings about the media. I can't imagine any other president doing something like this, no matter how they feel about Jim Acosta.
He's different.
He is, yeah. This is basically an attack on media, which he never shies away from criticizing, trying to inspire his supporters to criticize. I mean, look at his rallies that he holds. He always points out the media and tries to get the crowd engaged in at least verbally attacking the media, if not physically. And sometimes that has bled over into physical attacks. So you have to look at the Acosta incident in the context of what this president has said and done in regards to the media. And that's what makes it so dangerous.
Well, you know, I know that you're in the media and I'm in the media, but quite frankly, I think that the general public, if they trust anyone in the country less than politicians, it's probably media is kind of, I don't think it's less than politicians, but it's a close second.
It's probably a close,
yeah.
They're both right down there together.
So I think, you know, it comes under the heading of whether or not his feistiness, if you want to call it that, his ability to fight back, you know, it is in contrast to past presidents. You know, he's much more blunt and direct. And is that a good thing or a bad thing? And, you know, depending on whether or not you voted for him or depending on whether or not you have a chip on your shoulder yourself, I think that shapes your opinion.
Well, it could be a good thing if you could believe him. But, I mean, look at PolitiFact. What is he up to now? 6,000, I think, at last count. Outright lies, misstatements, distortions. So being blunt is one thing, but being bluntly dishonest, that's something else
I think
entirely.
the
And I think it's
people-
the media's job to hold him accountable for that.
No, we can go, I mean, we've got about 2 minutes left in the show, but I think if you go back and see from the time election night, when it was known that he was going to win, and you look at the media, ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, MSNBC, New York Times, most of the media were like crying out loud. Their heads were about to explode when they realized that he was going to be elected. And I can bring up, and maybe I will for a future show when you're here, I can bring up a highlight reel where they all were outraged that he was going to be president. And in some cases, they came right out and said that this is unacceptable and that he shouldn't be president. They were passing
You're
judgment on the
lumping
guy.
the media altogether, though. I think you have to separate reporters from opinion journalists.
And I am.
And I
And
don't
these
think you
guys were
see
reporters that I'm talking about. That's the unconscionable thing. These were reporters. These were not opinion people.
I would have to see that.
Yeah, I'll call that up. Maybe we'll have another show. We've only got a minute left in this
okay.
show.
All right.
It goes very quickly, and there's a dozen topics we haven't gotten to yet. Promise me you'll come back and have another
Okay.
conversation.
All right.
I think it will be good. Okay, there's a lot of things that the people out there can be thinking about with regard to politics, our president, issues, and hopefully you'll tune in for more big picture. This is the kind of show that we like to do. Food for thought, if you will. I'd like to thank my guest, Rod Watson from the Buffalo News. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much for watching The Big Picture. Thanks for watching WBBZ-TV. We always appreciate it. And we'll see you next time on The Big Picture.